The tally took 13 seconds. That was all it took to erase 5 centuries of hard-won speech. On the amphitheater floor of the Galactic Council, the result bloomed in cold glyphs over a vault of stars. Excision passes, 890-12. Translators converted it into a dozen scripts, then into one ache that required no language at all. Humanity was removed, rights suspended, treaties voided, delegates escorted out under the old fiction that silence equals peace. Ambassador Elena Vasquez did not resist when 2 ceremonial wardens approached. She closed her leather folio, the one she had carried through drought talks on Kesta Prime and ceasefires in the Broken Arm, and looked up at the skylight of vacuum beyond the dome. "To those who voted yes," she said quietly, voice caught by every mic, "remember what we taught you, how to listen to the small and the stubborn. You will miss us most where the maps lie." The warden's hands hovered, paused, and then they led her away. The chamber exhaled in relief. The problem had been managed. In the mezzanine, Councillor Keth Var of the Zapirian Combine leaned to a colleague. "They will shout and trade for a season," he said, "then accept the perimeter. Humans bend. That is their gift." He did not see the way the stars outside the dome shook, not with weapons, but with the quiet tremor of a vow. On a wind-hardened spit of basalt in the North Pacific, Admiral Sarah Chen watched the vote as a delayed transmission, the council's feed floating as a hologram above a mug of coffee gone cold. She had planned for a dozen possible futures. This was the one that required no more speeches. She tapped a key, her command bunker sighed awake. "Flag to all nodes," she said. "Abyssal protocol is green. Repeat, abyssal protocol is green." Retrieve deep archive keys Delta 9 through row 6. Surface assets remain passive and polite. Subsurface assets breathe. Across oceans and orbits, lockboxes opened. Some were literal, titanium capsules asleep under glacier and trench. Most were human, engineers who had built careers smiling through inspections, diplomats who had grown very good at counting to 10 before they spoke, captains who owned second passports in second names. All of them had rehearsed an improbable sentence for years. The council votes yes. We build what is not supposed to exist. At Lagrange 5, a freighter named Kite of letter 1E25, a RRA Macron N drifted loose of a sleepy convoy and slid into a lane no one used. Its container bays were empty. Its manifest was poetry. Its captain, a woman with skunk-striped hair and a devotion to crossword puzzles, hummed as her ship's thermal signature bent out of shape and vanished. She was not going to a place on any map. She was going to depth. Depth had a dozen names: Erebus Basin, Nadir Rift, Eventide Trench. Navi folk called it the place where stars fall inward. Academics called it a tidal shadow, a shear in the galactic disk where spindled dark matter and wrinkled gravity made instruments lie. Pilots called it bad luck. Humanity called it homework. The story began long before the vote, of course. It began with a question Earth had turned over in sleepless fingers since we learned to throw radio into night. If the sky is crowded and the rules are old, where do newcomers build? The answer was simple enough, far from eyes, near the truth that keeps eyes honest: gravity. We went to the abyss not because we preferred shadows, but because no one was brave enough to look there with us. In the weeks between whispers and vote, Treasury officials shuffled ledgers that would never be audited. Fishermen logged routes over coordinates that gnawed compasses. Children in an undersea classroom in Kiribati drew long boats with sails of lightning and called them guardians. And the old yard workers at Baconer, whose hands smelled of fuel and frost, sat across tables drinking tea and tracing curves in the air, arches of stress over spans that would be measured not in meters but in kilometers. When the vote fell, the response did not look like rage. There were no fireworks above the blue marble, no parades of flags. Earth's orbitals dimmed their beacons to save power for unremarkable reasons. Hundreds of small ships filed reasonable flight plans and then took reasonable deviations. Lawyers wrote very reasonable letters. And in the Nadir Rift, beyond the reach of reasonable eyes, scaffolds woke. They were not scaffolds in the way a dock is scaffold to a ship. They were more like cathedrals grown to hold hurricanes, latticeworks of carbon ceramic, braids of superconducting root that drank the dark and sang back gravity as if it were music. No light marked them. Their only illumination was the slow aurora of strained spacetime. In a pressurized cowl that pretended to be a hangar bay, Sarah Chen floated with a handful of others. Dr. Priya Narang, who had coaxed equations into steel, Chief Engineer Domings, who wore his grandfather's wrench on a chain, Sister Anahara Hohepa, chaplain to programs no one would admit existed, and a boy, cadet only by courtesy, whose father had died with a wrench and a smile in an unpressurized cowl that had failed. He had insisted on coming. Sarah had let him because every fleet needs witnesses who remember why. "Admiral," Priya said softly, nodding toward a veil of darkness within the darkness where geometry misbehaved. "She's taking form. The resonance is within tolerance." Sarah swallowed. Somewhere between her tongue and the back of her throat lived a prayer she did not know how to say. "Read the words," she told Sister Anahara. The chaplain unrolled a strip of thin metal etched with text. "We, the ones who were told to be quiet, choose to speak in the language of gravity. We promise restraint the way surgeons promise their hands. We promise memory the way rivers promise the sea. We do not come to conquer, we come to be heard." The boy listened, jaw tight, then whispered, "And if they won't hear us?" Sarah's smile was more tired than brave. "Then we will show them how listening is enforced, gently if possible." Behind the veil, something vast exhaled, a pressure that made bones notice their work. In the council chamber, the delegates filed out, satisfied with the tidiness of their act. In the nadir rift, the first heartbeat of a ship too large for names rippled through the deep. The galaxy had voted. Depth took note. Hook, they expected riots and ransom notes. They got a calendar. On Earth, the headlines spoke in the rhythms of embargo. Trade lanes recharted around a blue inconvenience. Credits froze. Outsourcing contracts suddenly discovered clauses about sovereign instability. The news feeds held panels in which experts said a proud people will calm and market forces will sand the edges. In the belt, a patrol cruiser paused beside a human refinery and asked for paperwork that did not exist yesterday. In the Arcadia spur, a corporate steward in a pale suit smiled as they moved to absorb 3 human habitats for continuity of life support. The response was quiet and scheduled. On Monday, the Orbital Public Works Authority shut down 24 entertainment satellites for maintenance and reassigned their power budgets. On Wednesday, 3,000 engineers called in favors earned ferrying water and medicine during other people's famines. On Friday, a school in Lagos held career day, and half the parents wore jumpsuits with unfamiliar patches, each a simplified icon of a myth. Atlas bent, Themis balanced, Hyperion burning, Aya Paris climbing. In the abyss, the scaffold sang truer, resonance settling like muscle memory. The math was Priya's music, graviton harmonics shaped into sails that would drink momentum from the galaxy's own spin, hulls plated in Persian weave. A carbon ceramic crystal seeded with boron and gold, lattice grown in vacuum over months like frost patterns on midnight glass. The keel sections were not built, they were coaxed, their curves following algorithms stolen from river deltas and the shells of Nautilus. You can't fight a galaxy with straight lines. Admiral Chen made rounds the way farmers walk their fields before a storm. She wore no medals in the abyss. Brass is loud and catches on things. She listened, first to machines, then to people. "Tell me something that scares you," she would ask, and the answers varied. Blind fold-ins, false positives on the sail, what happens if they shoot first? She logged each fear beside a procedure and an old-fashioned human promise: if this fails, I will be there. There are captains, and there are shepherds. The abyss requires both. Messages slipped, too, not the shrill kind, not threats. Elena Vasquez, now ambassador to nothing, recorded a series of lectures called Notes from a Small Planet. She released them under public license and let them wander. They did not name the council's vote. They talked about policing a neighborhood when your badge is a promise and not a weapon, about the way treaties are poems that must be read aloud, about how to forgive a neighbor who built a fence, and how to cut the lock when the fence steals your sunlight. Aliens listened because she made them feel human. The council listened as well, but in their own way, with memos and market forecasts and the lint on their cuffs. Sanctions tightened. A navy that called itself peacekeeping moved practice pieces nearer to Earth because practice is always more convenient near the poor. A dossier circulated naming possible, non-compliant assets. Asteroid yards, ice mines, freighters that filed poetry for manifests. The Abyss never made the list because the Abyss was a place you laughed about in mess halls. One afternoon that lasted 23 hours, time being obedient to depth where clocks were less so, Sarah stood with Priya at the edge of a chamber cut like a cathedral apse. Before them hung a hollow the size of a city block, a dome of negative light into which the lattice extended like fingers reaching for a face in the dark. The measurements called it a sail. Priya, who had grown up watching monsoon cloud banks walk across fields like gods, called it a thirst. "We'll need 4, Priya said. 1 for mass, 1 for spin, 2 for mercy." "Mercy?" Sarah asked. Priya's smile slanted. "Redundancy is what engineers name mercy after we get funding." Sarah laughed the way leaders laugh when it is either that or sleep. "You named them?" she asked, eyes tracing the curling ribs. "We all did. Atlas is the spine, Hyperion is the fire, Themis is the metronome. Iapetus is what I tell my mother I work on when she asks if I've made anything beautiful." Sarah nodded. "Then let the record show beauty pays the bills." Her tone softened. "When they come, we will not fire first." Priya met her eyes, "And when they fire first, then we teach them a grammar lesson." The boy cadet Theo hovered near, eyes huge, recording notes with the reverence of a scribe in an illuminated age. "What grammar?" he asked. "That listening is an active verb," Sarah said, "and contempt is a noun that breaks under pressure." Somewhere behind the ribs, 1,000 micro-foundries printed the last of the hull's skin, each layer annealed with the ache of newborn metal cooling in a vacuum that had never learned air. The scaffolds dimmed as they surrendered current to the growing heart of the ships. A timer rolled on the wall, no numbers, just a fade from indigo toward dawn. Back in the bright parts of space, a council enforcement group, 4 capital ships and a garden of frigates, accepted a route projected by software that had never misled anyone until now. Their captain was not cruel. He believed in rules the way surgeons believe in skin, cut only with consent. He sipped bitter tea as he read an intelligence brief that used the word rogue too many times to be useful. "We will hail them," he told his XO. "If they fail to respond, we will disable gently." His Zo, who had once given water to human refugees aboard a broken commuter, nodded. "And if they respond with something new, sir?" The captain smiled, humane and professional. "Then we will learn together." Learning began with a gentle shudder. Coordinates that had drawn a neat arc across untroubled void developed a taste for curves. The patrol's helm asked for left and received nearer. The nav screens, trained since cadethood to obey gravity's accent, found themselves listening to vowels they had never heard. "Sirs," a navigator said in a small voice, "there is a drift in the disk." The captain leaned forward. Outside the viewpanes, starlight skewed not with weapon heat, but with tide. The Abyss does not snarl, it lulls. It offered that fleet a story about the easiest way through a forest being the path that descends. They believed it, they descended. The council logged a minor delay. Earth filed a minor protest. The news feeds debated the ethics of blockade in high orbit while ads suggested better toothbrushes and brighter sleep. Elena recorded notes number 9 on building big things in small rooms. She ended with a sentence that sounded like a prayer, or a threat, or both. "There are voices that only gravity can amplify," she said. "We are learning the tune." The timer in the Abyss faded from indigo toward the color of decision. You can only be exiled if you accept the border someone else draws. On a catwalk a kilometer long, Theo clipped his tether to a guide line and pushed into a darkness that learned his name by listening to how his breath bounced from its ribs. Below him, a ship's flank curved like the inside of a planet. He could not see it. He could feel it in the soles of his boots, the way mass hums when it remembers that it is allowed. He whispered the name so he would not forget where he was. Atlas, Hyperion, Themis, Iapetus. The syllables came back slower as if the abyss were chewing, savoring. Cadet, came Sarah's voice in his ear. Report your joy. He grinned in spite of the ache behind his eyes. I am standing on a sentence any council will read, he said. Good, Sarah answered. Be careful with punctuation. If there was fear, it was an articulate fear. The engineers feared tolerances. The pilots feared drift. The chaplain feared that victory would widen into vanity. Sarah feared the hour after the first success, when power always asks for just a little more room to put its feet up. Only Theo feared small things, the way a tether might fray, the way a word might be taken wrong, the way a vote might echo for a century. That is why Sarah kept him where she could hear him breathe. Priya drifted alongside, a tablet anchored to her forearm with a braided strap. Sails are awake, she said. The drink is good. If gravity is the song, we're in key. What about the council fleet? Sarah asked. Lost to their own caution, Priya replied. Their captain read the abyss like a manual. Manuals are honest in ordinary weather. Will they die? No, Priya said. The abyss is not a killer by nature. It is a collector. They'll come out slower, changed. Then we still have time to teach. Teach what? That a species has the right to mispronounce the heavens until it invents better alphabets. That treaties signed by a frightened majority do not bind the minority forever. That exile, when chosen, becomes pilgrimage. Sarah did not build a speech. Speeches harden too fast. She collected words and left them warm. Elena, alone in a small apartment over a noodle shop in Quito, watched the enforcement fleet's error blossom into a news cycle no one wanted to discuss. She finished notes number 10, on councils and kitchens, in which she compared governance to making broth. Skim often, don't confuse clarity with thinness, and never believe the foam. She read the last lines into the mic while the cook downstairs banged pots like a festival. If they will not share a table, she said, we will build one so large they cannot walk around it. The table was taking shape in the abyss. Themis rolled first, an almost imperceptible torque through her half-grown bones as test masses whirled, measuring how the frame held will. She was the metronome, the reminder that power must keep time with conscience. Hyperion answered next, heating himself with nothing more than drag against the galaxy's spin, a sizzle like rain on a summer road. Atlas did not move, he brooded. He had too much to carry to be hasty. Iapetus dreamed. Sarah floated in Mission Room 1, a nest of handholds and quiet lights and a table that looked to her private eye like a kitchen. Around it faces, Priya, Domings, Sister Anahara, Theo, half a dozen pilots whose names had been sworn into the deep like vows. She issued orders the way she always had, one verb at a time. Align, check, preach, breathe. Domings scratched under his beard. Preach. Sister Anahara smiled. When people are about to do something impossible, they need someone to tell them what this is for. Priya's tablet pinged. We have a visitor, she said. Not the council fleet, they're still learning about humility. A news probe, independence. They found a hairline in the dark and followed it. Sarah closed her eyes. The thought of cameras made her feel like she was standing barefoot on gravel. Let it see what it can't understand, she said. We will not threaten, we will not boast, we will show the outline. Theo whispered, like chalk around a doorframe so a child knows where home begins. Exactly, Sarah said. The probe slid across the trench and failed to map it. Its images looked like prayers written by a hand that had never seen light. The feeds that carried them did not call the lattice by its name. They said shadow bloom, an artifact of compression. The icon of a veiled, curving thing trended for 6 minutes and was suppressed for 60. But 6 minutes is enough to seed a rumor in 1,000 languages. Long before councils decree, people decide. The timer bled toward dawn. In the enforcement flagship trapped inside the slope of the abyss's grammar, the captain stood from his chair and said to no one in particular, "We will not die here. This is not a grave. It is a classroom." The Zoe, who had been tracing prayer shapes in his palm, swallowed. "Sir, I think we are being carried like driftwood." "Then let us be polished," the captain said, and in that humble sentence lay the reason he deserved command. Polish requires friction. The abyss gave them that gently, like a river rounding a stone. When their ships reappeared, they would speak more softly without knowing why. In Mission Room 1, Sarah felt a change in the dark akin to a child's breath shifting in sleep. Priya's eyes widened. "She's there," the engineer said. "Atlas, are we ready?" Sarah asked. Priya's voice shook, not with fear. "We were ready the first day some ancestor carved a prow that could hold against tide." Sister Anahara's hand found the strip of etched metal again. She read not the whole creed this time, but a footnote, because footnotes are where humanity hides its bravest thoughts. "We will be large without becoming cruel. We will be strong without becoming deaf. We will be many without becoming a crowd." Theo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand as if clearing a visor. "And if they shoot at us?" Sarah looked at him and saw Earth, the small farms, the lawyerly letters, the quiet calendar. "Then," she said, "we show them that gravity has hands." The veil moved, not parted, moved, the way a heavy curtain breathes when something vast walks behind it. Atlas turned his face toward the shallows where the galaxy pretends it is easy. Hyperion stirred. Themis counted. Iapetus woke with a smile. The timer went white. The galaxy did not see fire. It saw a correction. They came not as spears, but as shores. 4 hulls easing out of the trench with the unpanicked inevitability of tide. No running lights, no battle paint. Their skin wore the color of event and edge, not black, not silver, something like the look of rain just before it is rain. Along their flanks, ribbed sails unfurled, web fine and city-wide, quivering as they drank from rotation and dark. Atlas led, his spine a boulevard of anchors and bays yawning like cathedrals. Hyperion glowed through his skin, heat haloing where graviton drink bled into ordinary photons. Themis ticked, in fields and measures, invisible except to instruments, aligning clocks she did not own. Iapetus was the youngest and the most beautiful, curve following curve as if he had been sketched by a river. The probe that had braved the edge saw them, and gave the galaxy a handful of frames before 20 jurisdictions argued about the legality of awe. Those frames did not show weapons. They showed proportion. Viewers felt something behind the sternums, a pressure like realizing your house is built on a fault that has decided to be kind today. "Open channel," Sarah said. Her voice went out through 1,000 antennas and one wound in her chest she had carried since Academy. In the council chamber, the audio cut through 5 layers of comfortably prioritized messages because someone had left a certain filter open in case of poetry. Bureaucracies are saved by their poets or undone by them. It is the same thing in time. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of Earth," she said. "You voted us out. I am showing you what that vote taught us to build." Silence followed richly. Then Themis tapped an inaudible stick against an inaudible rim, and time around the Titan settled the way a classroom settles when a respected teacher lifts a hand. "We do not declare war," Sarah continued. "We declare wait. We will enforce our borders. Those are new now. You do not know where they are yet. We will guard our freighters and farms. We will escort refugees home who wish to go and make home for those who cannot. We request a tribunal open to small voices about the events that led to our excision. We will accept the verdict if it is made under a sky not owned by the largest navies." Counselor Keth Var leaned toward a mic, then stopped. He did not have word for what it feels like when a species modestly puts something large on the table and asks everyone to keep their forks. Around him murmurs. On outer rings, junior delegates ran numbers they did not believe, mass projections, field strengths, unborrowed power. Someone whispered impossible, someone else whispered polite, a third whispered worse. "Your sanctions end today," Sarah said. "Any ship seizing human assets without a signed request from the humans aboard will be held, slowed, and returned. We will not damage, we will demonstrate. This is not a show of force. It is a lesson in the physics of consent." Elena in Quito laughed through tears into her cold tea. "Yes," she told the noodle shop, "say it that way." At the abyss's perimeter, the enforcement fleet reappeared, gentled and bewildered. Their captain, eyes damp with something he would not name to his crew, opened his mouth to hail and found himself speaking slower. The abyss had taught his voice to land softer. "Admiral Chen," he said, "this is Captain Risk of the Council Peacekeeping. We request hospitality." Sarah smiled, not for the camera, for Theo. "Welcome," she said. "Please hold station. Themis will keep your clocks. You have the right to remain yourself." Not everyone listened. A heavy cruiser, older, angrier, spilled from warp late and blind, its commander reading an old memo with a young man's certainty. He saw large things and assumed empty threats. He fired a warning lance across Aya Perez' bow that missed only because Themis had already decided it would. What the galaxy saw next would live in museums and lullabies. Aya Perez did not return fire. He leaned. The lance, pure energy pretending to be a line, arrived at a place where the math asked it a favor: slow down and show your work. The beam complied in public. It stretched like taffy, brightness stepping through colors as if embarrassed, until it touched Aya Perez's forward field and stuttered into something that looked almost gentle. In the view, a hand had caught a bullet and set it on the table with a small clink of good manners. Theo exhaled, a sound like being born. Priya put a fist against her lips. Domings let out a swear that sounded like a prayer. "Captain," Sarah said, addressing the angry cruiser, "this is your one free lesson. You aimed at a classroom. We will mark you present and move on." Hyperion flexed, not flame but warmth, bathing the cruiser in a bath of differential time that made their weapons crews feel very sleepy and their reactors think it was last week. The ship drifted out of firing posture as if reconsidering its life. In the council chamber, a dozen hardliners surged toward microphones. Kethvar lifted a hand. He was not brave. He was smart, which is what bravery looks like right before it arrives. "Schedule the tribunal," he said to the clerk, voice even. "Invite the small. Broadcast in the slow bands, too. And for the love of the old maps, do not let the poets anywhere near the copy." On Earth, plazas filled, not with chance, but with something older, listening. People watched 4 vast ships hold space the way a father holds out an arm at a sudden stop. In Lagos, kids rewound the beam catch and turned it into a dance. In Kiribati, undersea students tapped on their domes and cheered as if whales had learned new songs. Sarah breathed. The Titans breathed with her. "We are not here to punish you," she said softly, to the galaxy, to the boy, to herself. "We are here to make it possible for you to sit with us without lying." The countdown ended, not to war, but to posture. The first lesson had been taught. The second would be harder. Somewhere in the quiet places where decisions sharpen, men and women who had never seen a shipyard began writing plans to take the Titans, to dissect them, to declare that because something exists, it must belong to those who already own everything. Somewhere else, on a barge with a leaky roof, a grandparent told a child the new story, how we were voted out. So we built a door so large everyone could come through without bowing. In Mission Room 1, Sister Anahara closed her eyes and gave thanks that sounded like a warning. "Power is a river," she murmured. "Let us be banks, not flood." Theo tugged his tether, looked up at the hull that had caught a star and set it down safely, and asked the oldest question in any fleet. "Admiral, what now?" Sarah looked at the map, at the tribunal schedule populating, at a dozen red dots where stubborn ships were choosing stupidity over pride. "Now," she said, "we write new rules in the old language, and we keep the chalk out of the hands of children." Out in the shallows, the angry cruiser flared its engines again, pride complicated by shame. Its commander made the mistake his mentors had warned him against, confusing restraint for weakness. He fired a second time, aimed not at a Titan, but at a human convoy inbound from the belt. Atlas moved. What the galaxy saw next would not fit in any museum frame. They mistook restraint for emptiness and fired again. Atlas taught them what a full silence can do. The convoy was a string of ordinary courage, grain and medicine, school modules, a violin worth more in love than in credit. The lance brightened the void between escort drones like a lie committed to its own exaggeration. Before alarms could complete their syllables, Atlas moved with the certainty of mountains rediscovering their feet. It wasn't a shield. It was a correction. A plane of field unfolded from Atlas' forward ribs and bent spacetime the way a hand cups water, not stopping the stream but giving it a shape. The beam slid into that cupped geometry and slowed, frequency stepping down through colors that didn't exist on any artist's wheel, until it became a long thread of obedient light. It was set aside, intact, humming with the embarrassment of being caught. Sarah spoke softly into the open channel. "Captain of the cruiser Telluric Star, you aimed at civilians. We will not return harm. We will return your intent to you at 1/10 speed so your conscience has time to read it." Themes ticked. Clocks across 500 kilometers agreed to be kinder. Hyperion breathed warmth into the convoy's hulls, erasing the reactor stumble that fear writes. Iapetus drifted like a lighthouse sliding between shoal and ship, his sails tasting the pressure lines of panic and smoothing them with gentle drag. The Telluric Star answered with a second impulse, a scatter of smart kinetics built to cheat fields by refusing to look like one thing. Atlas replied by becoming multitudes. His forward face split into hexed facets, each a small gravity grammar, each telling a different pebble. Not today. The scatter became a choreography. Bullets turned moths turned dust, all of it set on a slow shelf out of everyone's way. Domings's exhale sounded like he'd been holding his breath for an ancestor. "Arresters are nominal," he reported, hands steady over controls he'd dreamt of long before he believed they could be real. "Hold them, don't humiliate," Sarah said. "Humiliation is a debt that collects interest." On the Telluric Star, the commander's mouth flattened, a line that years of doctrine had taught to be a lever. He had expected noise, not a hand that refused to be a fist. Shame arrived hot. He gave the order that turns shame into cruelty. Full spread, overload the firing solution, anything to break their posture. Hyperion stepped between anger and consequence. Not with heat, with yesterday. His fields folded the Telluric Star's targeting arrays backward through a small slice of time. A heartbeat ago, the capacitors were unprimed. A breath ago, the safeties engaged. Systems obeyed their own honest memories. The cruiser fell out of attack stance the way a man sits down when he realizes he's been standing on a chair he didn't need. Elena's voice moved through the bandwidth like cool water. "This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez," she said to the council feed and to whoever else still remembered how to listen. "Observe the civil weight doctrine in practice. Power applied to restore consent and proportion, not to punish, not to perform. This is what we asked from your navies for 50 years. We have built it ourselves." Counselor Keth Var watched the feed with the stillness of a statistician discovering a feeling. Around him, hardliners hissed about sovereignty and precedent. He thought about rivers and banks. He thought about how long you can ignore a tide before it draws a new map without you. "Signal them," Sarah said to Themis. "Offer terms." Themis' message arrived aboard the Telluric Star at a speed appropriate for dignity. "You are held in arrest by differential time no more than what you used placing your shot. No damage has been done. You may power down, broadcast an apology to the convoy you endangered, and anchor for tribunal review. If you refuse, the arrest will continue until your crew is too bored to be brave." Silence, then the sound of a chair being set back from a cliff. "We power down," the captain said, voice lower, a man reciting the names of his teachers. "We will anchor. We will apologize." The apology was awkward and public and exactly right. A string of simple words that placed responsibility where it belonged. The convoy continued under Iapetus' quiet wing. Children in a Lagos classroom cheered the way you do when someone returns a stolen ball and promises not to do it again. Theo pressed the back of his head to the cool of a bulkhead and let tears find their own path. "We didn't break them," he whispered. "We adjusted," Sister Anahara said, eyes bright. "Blessed are the correctors." Priya tapped the hull with 2 fingers, a habit from a childhood of making kites and believing they could talk. "This doesn't end the pattern," she said softly. "It begins the conversation where different threats will follow." Sarah nodded. "Then we will keep teaching." She turned to the wider channel. "Notice is hereby given. A tribunal will convene in 5 cycles at Assembly Ground Clytemnestra, midway between the Abyss and your favorite illusions. Attendance by small polities is guaranteed by Themis' clock. Speakers will be allotted time according to population, then double-weighted for those historically shouted down. Enforcement navies are invited to sit to listen, and if they must speak, to do so after the farmers. Kethvar lifted his chin. "Clerk, file our acceptance. Send it on every slow band. If we cannot outrun them, let us outlisten them." Atlas eased his facets closed. The held rain of captured beams drifted into inert patterns, small constellations that slowly forgot they once meant harm. On a dozen worlds, songwriters wrote fast. "Plot for Clytemnestra," Sarah murmured. "Make room at the table." The Titans turned, not sharply, not with the posture of arrows, but like continents deciding they preferred a new neighbor. The convoy tucked itself into their lee. In far offices, men who loved ownership more than sky began to write instructions that smelled like sabotage. In nearer places, families cooked too much food and wrapped plates for those who would not make it home in time to eat. Hyperion dimmed to a comfortable warmth. Themis ticked. Iapetus trailed a ribbon of scintillant dust as if to remind children where to look in the night. Atlas kept his hands open in case more rain needed setting down. The galaxy listened, some with approval, some with dread, all of them recalibrating the size of their excuses. If you cannot be heard at ordinary volume, bring a quieter room. Assembly Ground Clytemnestra was a place that decided not to belong to anyone the day it was born. A hollow asteroid spun true and lined with fields so gentle even old bones would not ache. Markets met here when they failed everywhere else. Treaties came to die here too, and sometimes to be reborn if someone remembered mercy. The Titans arrived like careful weather. Themis laid clocks along the walls, small silver mouths that tasted time and promised to return it clean. Sarah stood where the floor had been taught to remember feet. She wore no rank, only a patch shaped like a weighing scale, black on black, the kind that only shows when you're close enough to share breath. Elena stood beside her, papers in an old leather folio whose corners had softened against 1,000 tables. Priya checked the harmonics of the chamber as a musician checks a hall. Delegations filled the galleries. The dust choir of Matariel, who lost 3 languages to a water lease. The orchard syndics from Gliza 581, whose trees had been taxed until they learned to bear fruit that smelled like despair. 1,000 stubborn city-states and kinships with names that never made it into council minutes. They carried banners unrolled from winter trunks and dreams sewn by hands that told themselves it was foolish to hope. They came because the invitation had specified small first, and because Themis had included a note in the slow bands. "We will hear what you were told not to say." The council came, too. Kethvar with a stylus he clicked when nervous. Captain Risk in plain-duty grays, no sword, no pomp. Hardliners with holster-empty hips and holster-full eyes. They took their seats and discovered the chairs taught them to lean forward instead of back. Elena opened. She did not say we were wronged. She said, "We all survived because someone took a turn holding the sky while we swallowed." She described a civil weight doctrine in syllables comfortable to farmers. Do not push harder than needed to lift the load. Do not let go until hands replace yours. Do not pretend small hands cannot hold. She asked that cases be brought and heard and decided under clocks that refused to be bullied. Then the small began. A miner with lungs like paper reed dates into the air. Themis made sure none of them slipped. A fisherwoman, palms scarred by old nets and new bureaucracy, presented a diagram of how a patrol positioning protocol had turned a migration into a famine. A boy from a settlement with dust for a surname set an empty jar on the table and asked the council to hear what didn't echo inside. When hardliners shifted to speak, The room itself failed to find them. Themes allotted weight to words the way tides allot paths to rivers. HFY listened and felt something unclench that had been trained to bite. He asked for all the memos that had used the word rogue to be displayed in the upper galleries, each beside a translation into a language a child could read. By the fourth example, the upper air looked like a confession written in bureaucracy's cautious hand. Midway through, a corporate advocate attempted to flood the system with an old tactic, procedural thunder. He spoke quickly and loudly and brought 10 addenda for every claim against him. Themes slowed his consonants until the room could step over each one. He tried to hurry again and found himself held at a speed called comprehension. By the time he finished, he had said too much for his own comfort and exactly enough for the record. Priya presented the Titans' working diagrams, no military secrets, only the ethics that had been woven into stress members and field equations. "These are not weapons," she said. "They are kitchens and classrooms with large aprons. We could make them cruel, we chose to make them precise. Read the choices with us, argue if we have missed a one." The room argued, not with rage, with heat. A Xi archivist asked whether consent could ever be enforced by machines that enormous. Sister Anahara's answer was a story about a village drum big enough to wake the valley, hollow enough to be carried. "Use it to gather," she said, "never to drown a cry." Sarah closed the day's first session with an invitation. "We built Titans in the abyss because you would not let us build them on your charts. You voted us out. We learned a dialect of gravity where lies cannot keep time. We will keep these ships until the day your navies can be trusted with them more than we can. If that day comes, we will teach, not sell, teach. Until then, we are available for escort, for arbitration, for lifting the heavy when small shoulders have done their shifts." Risk spoke at last, his voice sanded by the abyss gentling. "Admiral Chen, I accept escort for our supply lines into the drift famine. I accept your tribunal's authority to review boarding rules. I accept that the word peacekeeping must earn its keep." It should have been a moment of simple relief. It became a trigger instead. From the north gallery, a figure moved with the stuttered grace of a man fighting his own instructions. He carried a case that wore the anonymity of tools and the smell of money. Theo saw it first because he had been looking for small, unheroic dangers all day. "Admiral," he said, voice thin, "North rail, case, wrong rhythm." The case was not a bomb in the way movies lie about bombs. It was a null casket, a folded volume of geometry designed to tell sails and fields that they had never been born. Crack it in the right place, and anything that listened to gravity more attentively than a rock would forget its own name. Themes ticked too late to be early, just in time to be enough. "All stand," she said calmly, and the room obeyed without knowing why. Atlas was still anchored miles away. Atlas still moved. He moved as banks do when the river rises, not to dam, to shape. A long, soft push, a palm of field that found the vector of the case and turned it 2 degrees toward a door. The null casket blossomed in an empty airlock not meant to remember anything. It fulfilled its purpose perfectly and told that airlock that nothing had ever existed there. The door forgot it had hinges. The hinges forgot metal. The forgotten place became what it had always wanted, quiet. No one was in it. The man with the empty hands fell weeping. "They told me you would gloat," he said to no one, to Sarah, to the river of listening. "They told me I would die making you show teeth." Sarah knelt until her eyes were level with a person who had been used. "Then watch," she said softly, "as we refuse to be the story you were sold." The gallery exhaled as if a storm had passed and realized it had only learned to move around a rock. "Recess," Elena announced, voice like tea poured into many cups. "We will resume when fear has had its 15 minutes." In back rooms filled with chairs that encouraged leaning forward, HFY signed an order authorizing full disclosure of all communications between corporate combines and council committees regarding Earth's excision. He clicked his stylus once, hard enough to be a vow. Somewhere, a memo considered growing a conscience. Out in the gentle dark, Hyperion warmed the corridor between the abyss and this fragile, temporary parliament. He hummed a work song very old and very practical, the one that keeps hands moving when the jar is heavy and the story longer than anyone planned. Power hates being asked to share. When diplomacy works, sabotage clocks in. During recess, the tribunal floor emptied into 100 edible arguments. The food stalls that had sprung up along Clytemnestra's lanes served stew and questions. Children traced the silhouettes of the Titans onto walls with chalk that would not leave until wind wanted it gone. In the shadows between stalls, someone tried again. Theo found the second man by listening for footsteps that chose corners instead of corridors. He didn't think hero, he thought maintenance. He followed the way you follow a drip to a roof. The man wore an engineer's vest with pockets that had too many stories and not enough lint. He knelt by an access panel and whispered a sequence like a prayer he didn't deserve. "Hold," Theo said, not loud. "Which clock tells you to hurry?" The man froze. The panel hummed, offended. "I have to open this," he said. His voice had that trapped echo of a person whose choices had been narrowed not by fate but by someone with a ledger. He searched for a lie and found the truth cheaper. It's a fold seed. If the Titans spin their sails here, it will make them tired. They'll fail graceful, no blood, no blame. "Whose blame?" Theo asked. The man's eyes slid away. "Mine, enough questions." Sister Anahura arrived without announcing herself. Chaplains learn to appear where heat gathers. She didn't say don't. She said, "If you are being paid to do this, someone has already paid to explain your failure. Do you want their words on your tongue?" He sagged. "I can't go back empty," he whispered. "They have my brother on a debt ship. They said they'd erase his hours if Priya crouched, hands open as if she were about to ask a kite to lift. "Let me see it," she said. "Not to scold, to help me design the apology you owe." The fold seed was elegant and cruel in the way elegant things are when they pretend to be helpful. It would have scattered Themy's metronome just enough to make hearings end before the small had finished sentences. It would have turned graviton drink into lukewarm tea. The Titans would not have failed. They would have faltered, and the press would have called falter proof. Sarah arrived with 2 rangers and a decision that tasted like iron. "We will not prosecute you," she told the would-be saboteur. Relief flooded the man's face like a harmful drug. "We will hire you instead. You will teach our cadets how your employers think. In exchange, we will retrieve your brother from his debt." The man blinked, as if hope were a too bright light. "You can't break a contract," he said, because fear had taught him law. "We can break its gravity," Sarah replied. "We can put it down so you can read it without your hands shaking." Hyperion took a breath that became a corridor. He extended warmth along a line mapped from the man's trembling memory to a refinery ship where labor was a number on a dark board. Themy's synced clocks across jurisdictions that pretended their time was sovereign. Atlas shifted the weight of a few uninspected crates on the debt ship's manifest until a security scan found itself looking at the possibility of embarrassment. Ayaperis slid close like a quiet sibling outside a schoolyard fight. The retrieval wasn't a raid. It was a reminder of proportions. Security personnel received 3 simultaneous messages, a tribunal docket number, a list of their own overtime grievances, and a gentle nudge from their reactor encouraging a lunch break. By the time they looked up from sandwiches they hadn't meant to eat, a young man with tired eyes and a name the ledger had misspelled was drinking water in Clytemnestra's shade. "Debt forgiven," Themis announced at precisely the speed the word forgiven deserves. The man who had held the fold seed folded himself instead, into a gratitude that hurt to watch and soothed to stand near. The council delegation returned to the chamber a little later and a little less armored in habit. Kethvar glanced toward the galleries and saw different banners than the mornings, some angrier, some braver, some stitched while waiting for verdicts. He raised his stylus. "Let the record show," he said, "that the tribunal recognizes coercion as a weapon. Let it set sentences not only on hands but on pockets." A hardliner attempted a last clean thrust. "You've made poetry into policy," she sneered at Alina. Your titans are cathedrals pretending to be tools. How many churches burn before you admit you built a doctrine of the beautiful to excuse the big? Elena smiled the way you smile at a student who thinks cynicism is clever. When you cannot imagine a cathedral that houses soup lines more often than choirs, she said, you tell on your architects. The gallery laughed not at the woman, but at the brittleness of a worldview that had forgotten kitchens. Humor is gravity's cousin. It brings things home. Testimony resumed. A pilot from a marginal navy spoke about rules of boarding that always became theater for the strong. A jurist from a drowned coast proposed consent lights, a shared protocol wherein ships could declare their state, consent to aid, consent to inspection, refusal with cause, and have those declarations read not as weakness but as binding grammar. Themes suggested frequencies. Priya sketched icons, green for welcome, amber for caution, blue for grief. Theo added a small violet light for I am listening, speak first. By evening, drafts of a new charter glowed on wall screens. The gravity convention, norms for proportionate intervention, the right to slow time in hearings while small speakers speak, mutual escort, the abolition of debt ships disguised as contracts, the legal recognition of the abyss as a commons underweight. The charter wasn't law. It was a map of how laws could stop lying. Outside, the Titans held station like seasons. Inside, Sarah looked at Theo and saw a boy who had learned to fear small things and in learning had taught her how to command large ones. Last session tomorrow, she said. Then we see if the river has changed its mind. Out among the cold stones, men who did not attend tribunals unless they owned them decided the last attempt would not be subtle. A fleet assembled in secret with an old name, repossession. They spoke of stabilizing assets. They meant stealing. They plotted a course that cut straight through the place where science says gravity thins and story says gods are bored. They would arrive at dawn. Themis ticked, gentler than sleep, and told dawn it might have to share. The fleet that came to take found there is no verb for repossessing a tide. They arrived big and quick and sure of their narrative. 12 capitals in a wedge, 50 escorts in a scattering meant to look like attention. Their signals were clean and lawyered. Their intent was a theft on behalf of a sentence containing the words for everyone's good. They expected the Titans to stiffen into spears and thereby justify being broken. The Titans did not stiffen. They widened. Atlas opened his ribs the way city gates open when a festival is homebound. The fields that held his shape extended, not to trap, to shape. Hyperion warmed the shallow bands where panic travels. Themis laid a rhythm that rewarded patience and fined hurry. Aya Paris glided until his shadow fell between the wedge and the tribunal hall like a dusk that had chosen a side. Sarah did not say halt. She said, welcome to Clytemnestra. Consent lights are active. Declare your intention and receive your hearing. Any approach above yellow will be slowed for comprehension. Repo Vanguard answered with a burn that pushed amber into red. Their doctrine had taught them that pace is authority. Themis taught them that comprehension outranks pace. Their vectors softened. Not stopped, held in a cradle that asked, are you sure? They tried to be sure. Atlas made certainty expensive. From the wedge's center, a command lance brightened, the old confidence again, the easy scandal of we will demonstrate on an object. Its arc went not for Titan or tribunal, but for an outlying aid barge bearing water and witnesses. The barge had the violet light glowing. I am listening, speak first. The lance called it a weak color. Atlas did not intercept. Atlas displaced. He read the lance the way a mason reads a crack, where it wants to go, where it's pretending to. He put a small canyon in front of it, an absence of time, so brief instruments call it impolite. The beam stepped into yesterday and came out in the empty field where the null casket had unmade a door. It dissipated against old quiet. The past did what it's for, absorbed what the present couldn't handle. Hyperion exhaled a warmth that looked like forgiveness and felt like warning. He bathed the lead capitals in a gradient that made aggression taste like stale bread. Computers craving novelty throttled back just to feel interesting again. Crews blinked and found their aiming reticles had started to look like pupils, embarrassed and wide. Priya spoke over General. "You're experiencing counter-habit. It's not a weapon. It's a pause. Use it." They did not immediately. The second salvo was smarter. Spread spectrum, long-tail kinetics, legal disclaimers attached to each packet like little shields of paper. Aya Perez twined through them, sails vibrating at frequencies that turned darts into notes and notes into dust. It was beautiful. That was not the point. The point was that no one died. On the tribunal floor, Elena stood at the central mic and read the first clause of the Gravity Convention in a voice that could have sold bread to kings and mercy to accountants. Article 1, power is not proof. Consent is not decoration. Weight is applied to restore balance, not advantage. She looked up at the wedge held like an unfortunate metaphor and said, "You may continue to perform your old play. Our stage will not remember the exits." Keth Var, chewing the inside of his cheek as if it were a budget line that had betrayed him, signed the council's acceptance. Across the hall, Captain Risk added his name in the plain script of someone who has stopped pretending to be more important than his crew. The hardliner with the clever sneer left the room without slamming the door, which was the first decent act she'd performed in public. Atlas addressed Repo Vanguard directly. "Your contracts are not gods," he said, and it was odd to hear a ship speak. Odder still to realize the voice was no one's and everyone's, drawn from a choir of bridge officers, dancers, welders, mothers, and a boy who had learned to hear small dangers. "They cannot command tides. They cannot repossess doors we have learned to build." He reached, slow as ceremony, and took hold of 3 capital ships not by their hulls but by their excuses. He gave those excuses back to them, slowed and legible. On each bridge, commanders watched arguments they had read as orders appear on the main screen as choices, annotated in the margins by the faces of the people who would be priced by them. It is difficult to fire a weapon while reading your own handwriting asking you if you're sure. One by one, consent lights changed. Red calmed into amber. Violet flickered. "I am listening. Speak first." The wedge's point softened until it was not a point, only a group of ships at a loss for verbs. Then came the moment for which the story will be remembered in places where children are taught to carry chalk. Theo stepped to the tribunal mic, throat clicking. Sarah nodded him forward, her hand affirming on his shoulder that felt like a plank's steadiness under a crossing. Theo spoke to the room, to the ships, to the screens in markets and kitchens and guard rooms. "You voted us out," he said, voice not loud, incredibly clear. "So we went where you didn't look and built the thing you kept promising and never making. It is big because you ignored us when we were small. It is gentle because we remember being hurt. It will not be yours until you prove you love the small more than you love being large." Silence followed, the right kind. Themis counted it generously so it would not be mistaken for delay. Repo Vanguard powered down, not in defeat, in comprehension. Their admiralty sent words that had been too expensive yesterday. "We request terms." Elena handed them a copy of the charter and a bowl of soup. She had found the kitchen. Of course she had. By dusk, the kind Themis sets with a metronome and Hyperion makes comfortable, the tribunal ratified the Gravity Convention. The council rescinded the excision in phrasing that did not pretend it had always loved us. It admitted a simple thing that bureaucracies say only when the alternative is worse. "We were wrong. We will repair." Repair began immediately. Escorts went out to famine corridors where navies had sung of security and forgotten bread. Patrols shifted from policing to walking with. Debt ships found their manifests weighed and their ledgers lightened. The abyss was recognized as commons. The Titans were chartered not as weapons, but as public works with teeth to protect teethless things. The charter's last clause read, in a hand that looked like Theo's, "Leave maps better than you found them." That night, under Clytemnestra's gentle ceiling, people danced. The slow, reassuring dances of species that have decided not to leave the party angry. Children drew the Titans again, this time with windows full of faces. The angry cruiser Telluric Star hosted a small concert in its hangar bay. The captain invited the convoy's violinist to play. She chose a piece that begins like rain and ends like a door opening. Sarah stood with Alina and Priya and Domings and sister Anahara and Theo at the edge of a balcony that had not existed yesterday. "We're not done," Priya said, eyes on the work orders queuing for bridges and clinics and schools. "We're never done," Sarah answered. "But we are no longer alone, that counts." "Do we keep the Titans?" Theo asked, almost shy around the size of his own hope. "For as long as big ships are needed to teach small lessons," Sarah said, "and no longer than that." Far off, the abyss breathed, amused that anyone ever called it empty. The Titans turned their great faces homeward and outward, and nowhere in particular, ready to be banks when the river ran high and hands when the rain needed setting down. A galaxy that had voted a voice out found itself singing a better harmony than it deserved. At the very end, when the markets were closing and the kitchens were washing bowls, Keth Var found a quiet corner and recorded a sentence for the minutes, one that would be quoted in classrooms long after his name became a footnote. "They did not answer with warships," he said. "They answered with Titans, and taught us that some doors are large enough to fit even our pride. And somewhere in the Nadir Rift, where maps go to learn humility, a scaffold dimmed and slept, satisfied with the day's grammar.